Mussolini and his fascists were violent nationalists who believed in the systematic use of violence. Fascist black shirts attacked all who opposed them, like liberals and Catholics, but their main target was socialists, who threatened a revolution like the one in Russia. In October 1922, fascists seized provinces across northern Italy, then marched on Rome in their thousands to demand power through force of arms. The king gave in and made Mussolini the world's first fascist prime minister. He became a dictator. This is the story of Mussolini in power, a story of mass adulation, a story of dreams of empire, of a disastrous alliance with Hitler, and of military failures and ignominious death, all told for the first time in color. From his earliest days in power, Mussolini's main aim was to restore the glories of the ancient Roman Empire. And his main frustration was the reality of Italy in the 1920s.
Disorganized, chaotic, unstable. That was a far cry from the Roman Empire, when Italy had been great, when it had really dominated the Mediterranean, when it had had its own massive empire. And Mussolini looked back to the past and thought, we should be there again.
Mussolini modeled his behavior on the Roman emperors. To equal their ruthlessness, Mussolini would betray anyone, even loyal, devoted fascist families ready to die for their country. He would even betray his own family, his son-in-law and favorite daughter. Once in power, Mussolini started to build the world's first totalitarian state, bending all institutions and people to his will. To build a new type of Italian, Mussolini knew he had to start with the young.
La nostra patria.
In 1925, Mussolini decreed,
"The government demands that the school be inspired by the ideals of fascism."
Adesso bambini leggiamo una poesia di Giuseppe Zucca. Duce chiamaci.
Children were ordered to believe, obey, fight. From the age of 4, they were dragooned into fascist youth organizations, which supplied them with toy guns and black shirts.
Duce, duce, chiamaci.
Duce, duce, chiamaci.
La voce degli eroi.
La voce degli eroi.
School poems taught children to be ready to fight for fascism whenever the leader needed them.
La gran voce dei martiri.
La gran voce dei martiri.
In schools, I tried to inculcate patriotism, and they tried to persuade all school children that patriotism and fascism are the same thing. You couldn't be a patriot without being a fascist, and you couldn't be a fascist without loving Mussolini.
Adesso bambini facciamo.
Every school children would have to sort of write an essay on why I love Mussolini, or why Mussolini is the greatest man of the 20th century.
Punto. Punto.
As well as propaganda for the masses, Mussolini also created a repressive police state to enforce obedience to fascism.
They had a very powerful machine, both created by the Fascist Party and also just by the state police. Extremely far-reaching machine for surveillance, for spying. I mean, very little went on that the Fascist police, or one of the various Fascist polices, didn't know about. And there were enormous numbers of actions carried out by the police every week.
Mussolini had enormous power, but knew he still had to appease the 99% of Italians who were Catholics. And the Vatican also wanted a deal.
As a result of the Risorgimento, Italian unification in the 19th century, the Church lost its status, and it lost its property. It lost its the Papal States vanished. So from 1870 until 1929, the Pope really had no country.
In 1929, Mussolini and the Vatican signed the Lateran Pacts, giving the Church virtually everything it wanted.
The Lateran Pacts of February 1929, I think, are one of the most important events in the history of 20th century Italy. First of all, they put an end to the church-state dispute. If you like, they reinserted Catholicism into Italian society. It totally changed, I think, the balance of power between the Catholic Church in Italy and the Italian state.
As with the monarchy, the Vatican much preferred the reality of fascism to the threat of communism. The Pope gained control of the Vatican City as a sovereign state and received 1.75 billion lire in compensation for historic losses, mostly in government bonds.
And the government bonds obviously meant that in some curious way, the Catholic Church, the Vatican, was underwriting the fascist state. And people at the time warned this was a very dangerous thing to be doing. The Vatican had committed itself to fascism for the foreseeable future. It had no confidence in the capacity of democracy to protect Italy against communism.
Pope Pius XI proclaimed that Mussolini was that man whom divine providence had allowed him to meet. In 1929, leading Jewish war veterans and their representatives were invited to meet the leader, seemingly gifted to Italy by divine providence. Many Jews had welcomed fascism as the rebirth of the Risorgimento, the 19th century nationalist movement that had unified Italy and set the Jews free from the ghetto. Their leader that day was Ettore Evazzo, a wealthy Turin banker. He wrote joyously about the experience in his diary.
He welcomes us with a slight smile. He is serene. Seated at his desk, he motions to us to advance. It was the first time I was to see the face of Il Duce up close.
Ettore, with his two brothers, had fought in the First World War and then joined the new fascist party. Ettore joined the Black Shirt militia and took part in their violence against socialists. To meet the Duce was the fulfillment of a dream for Ettore.
On hearing of my affirmation for the unshakable loyalty of Italian Jews to the fatherland, His Excellency Mussolini looks me straight in the eye and says with a voice that penetrates straight down to my heart, "I have never doubted it."
Ettore was overcome with a wave of emotion. Later, Mussolini would turn a blind eye when the Nazis sent thousands of Italian Jews to their death. Mussolini knew Italy had to be modernized before he could create a fascist empire to rival ancient Rome. The fascists introduced a policy of self-sufficiency for agriculture and industry. Massive public works programs to drain marshes and build roads created jobs and were hugely popular. But for Mussolini, their main aim was to prepare the Italian economy for war. The first armed conflict came with a popular rising in Libya, Italy's most important colony.
The Italians had become increasingly ruthless. They'd use mass rapes, desecration of mosques, rounding up civilians into concentration camps, mass starvation, the use of chemical weapons against civilians and guerrilla combatants.